Welcome back to Distant Shores. I'm Paul Shard, and this time we're going to be looking at electrical power budget overview. Last week we started off by talking about how you could look at power, what power is, electrical power in watts and watt hours. But this time we're going to dive in and do a calculation on an electrical power budget, looking at the examples from our boat and also how we monitor it on our boat. And we're also going to talk about how you can do that yourself on your boat, or calculate any of the devices you're thinking of adding if you're adding stuff in, and calculate that. So let's jump right in. Okay, so here's our electrical panel. I think this is a great design. You've got all of the navigation instruments down here, bilge pumps, all navigational lights are up here, and then all the main domestic services are in this big block. It's quite easy to look at the panel and see what is switched on and what's not switched on. In this case, we're going to turn a bunch of things off and then just turn them on one at a time and see how much they use. Now, one of our biggest users is the fridge. I've got it off now, and then when I turn it on, we'll see how the number changes over on the panel that monitors. And you can see that it's using 0.06 of a kilowatt hour. So 0.06 is 60 watts. And of course, the problem with the fridge is it's hard to judge how much it's going to be on. If you're living in a tropical environment like we are, we're using something like 500 watt hours a day. So we'll put that in the spreadsheet. The freezer, I'll turn that one on, and that adds about 80 watts. So this is a bigger compressor on the freezer. It's not running quite as often, and our total for the day is around 600 watt hours. Our biggest users when we're at sea are almost certainly going to be the nav instruments and the autopilot. That's all down here under navigational systems. We're going to turn on instruments, network switch, autopilot, and the VHF, and that's basically what we normally have switched on, and that's running at about 40 watts. So if we were to run... See live. That would be the VHF. Okay. Here, I'm just going to turn that one off again. There we go. Another one that uses a fair bit is radar. So again, the radar can be in standby and doesn't use that much, but when you're transmitting it does use a fair bit. And then one of the biggest users is the autopilot. So that is it's a pretty big motor, quarter horsepower motor that's going back and forth quite a bit of the time, and that is one of our largest power users at sea. The autopilot runs 50 watts. That's sort of an average use, and then it's running kind of about half the time, so you're getting about 500 or 600 watts of watt hours in the day for the autopilot. So we have our 12 volt sockets. That's where we're plugging and charging our phones and iPads and all kinds of stuff. So of course that varies quite a lot depending on how much use people are doing with their phones and everything. So you have to sort of judge how much use you're going to get out of devices like that. One of our biggest power users is the computers, which doesn't show up on this panel because this is all 12 volt stuff and the computers are charging off our inverter. In our case, we find the computer can use anywhere from 10 watts up to as much as 50 watts when we're video editing with external hard drives hanging off. So that can be quite a lot if we're going to do a few hours or 5 or 6 or even more hours in a big day of editing. You could use a few hundred watt hours just with one computer. So that's quite a lot. And the easiest way to do that would be to look at the name plaque on the computer as we talked about in the previous video. Cheers. Another useful thing to have on board in your toolkit is a DC clamp meter. This goes over a wire like that and can tell how many amps are flowing through the wire. You can use it to monitor heavy draw items such as our keel motor. So why don't you give it a try? Okay. Well, the keel's down here, so we can just clamp it over the cable like that, and you can get a meter reading out of it. How many amps are flowing through the cable? And then when you start to run, we see that we've got about 70 amps. One of our bigger power users down here in the tropics is our fans. We have 7 of them. They only use 1.5 watts when they're operating at the low speed, which is here. And that produces quite a lot of air movement. It keeps us very cool and very comfortable. The problem is if you're running them all the time, the 1.5 watts adds up. That gives you 36 watts over 24 hours for one fan. Assuming we have, say, 3 of them going all the time, that's getting to be over 100 watt hours for the whole day. Our inverter produces house current from our batteries, but we don't leave it on all the time. It uses 25 watts just idling, plus whatever the device is. If we left it on the whole day, that would be 600 watts. we installed a remote switch so we can turn it on when needed, for example, when using the microwave or kitchen gadgets or when video editing. I'll add it in the budget at just 4 hours times 25 watts is 100 watt-hours. All our lights are now LED, saving a lot of power, but still the total can be fairly substantial if you are up a lot at night or on passage. Our lights here use 5 watts each. These reading lights are less than 2 watts. Our lighting use varies, but typical power per day is about 5 hours times 6 bulbs times 5 watts, or 150 watt-hours. Obviously, if you have a party and turn on all the lights, our boat uses a lot more. Running the saloon lights and aft cabin lights take more than 100 watts per hour. I've gone ahead and added our water maker and done some more, so here's the budget so far with the biggest power users at the top. I recommend making a budget for the typical day at anchor and another for the boat on passage, since they're pretty different. And of course, we'll need to supply the power for all this. We'll look at this in an upcoming episode, so please subscribe if you haven't already to hear about our new videos. And if you've got a question or comment, please put it below. Have you done a budget for power on your boat? What's the biggest power draw item you want to add? Thanks for watching, and see you next time.